I fumbled $10,000. It's not clickbait. I really did fumble a $10,000 final. And I know that's not much in the grand scheme of things, but as far as prize money in Jiu Jitsu goes, it's notable. And this is something I want to talk about a little as we go through my match against Josh Alsop. Oftentimes we can criticize certain decisions we make with the information we have now, but forget to consider them with the information we had at the time. It's important to note the differences between bad decisions we made on good information and decisions we made on bad information. I'll talk more about that as it becomes relevant, but to set the stage a little, this was the final at Scrap Mats 3, an event at Alex Volkanovski's gym in collaboration with StreetX, and my opponent Josh is an AOJ black belt under the Mendez brothers. To talk on him a little, Josh and I have trained quite a bit over the years, and he's truly one of the best competitors in Australia. I actually had him as the favourite to win ADCC trials, and he lost in the finals to another good friend of mine, Kaya Rudolph. All this to say, Josh is someone to keep an eye on the international stage, and with that, let's have a look at the match. So we're just going, just had the walkouts, and this is for the final. So both of us at this stage had 3 matches each. Both of us are winning our matches via submission. I had 3 heel hooks, so 2 outside heel hooks and 1 inside heel hook, and I believe Josh had gotten a smother, an armbar, and I think a rear strangle in the first round against Ashton, one of my teammates. And then I also went against one of my teammates the round before this, Axel Howie, who's really quite good. He'd recently, well, both of them actually really quite good, but Axel had recently gotten 4th at ADCC trials. Ashton coming up, he's going to be at a really high level soon too. So both guys to keep an eye out for. But anyway, so this competition, a little bit of a weird one. Just the way it was put together. They originally weren't going to have a referee on the mats, and during the rules meeting, a few of us competitors were a little bit put off by that. So in the end, they ended up pulling Michael in, who's a good friend of mine, put one of the new gis on him. So in this case here, what it's doing is reinforcing that sort of knees to chest, that movement that I'm doing here. I'm trying to close off the space at my hips. When we think about guard retention and guard passing, is the battle of sort of for the hips here, where the guard player is trying to gain access to the hips. So notice Josh is starting to get inside one of my hips here, and he's trying to get inside of the other hip. So all good guard passes are going to require access to both hips to some degree. And you see this reflected as well in what are successful pinning situations once you get to the other side of a successful guard pass, which is going to be the person that has to be inside of the hips. Rarely can someone actually successfully sort of maintain a guard pass when they're at the shoulders. Now, pinning and actually preventing someone from turtling, different thing. But in terms of the actual battle for passing here, or guard passing versus guard player here, we're thinking about the hips. And so what I'm trying to do as the bottom player then is protecting the space of my hips. And so this is what the lasso is for example, here. If I didn't have my lasso inside, Josh would be dominating the inside of my hip there. And this self frame here, pulling that right knee to my chest, stops his knee from getting inside of the pocket of my hip there. So this is what my focus is. And then using this sort of tricep here is going to reinforce what's going on, as well as give me robust connection to the upper body. Now the problem is, and so you see this here, so the self-framing also allows me to keep my hip unpinned. And so there's certain options here. If Josh had flanked around slightly further, it would have allowed me to invert from here, for example. And so you can see from here, I'm trying to bring my foot inside. Now this is the other thing as well when we start thinking about guard retention principles. So we're thinking battle of the hips. And then the idea is that top player is trying to find ways to access the hips. So one way they can do that is by getting outside of the knees, either by getting over the knees on one side or under the knees on the other side. Or if we're thinking about, maybe in like a Toriando situation, you've got your 2 knees sort of lining up with your opponent, then wanting to get to one side or the other of your knees there. So one of the big things we focus on is the way my knees are aligned with Josh. I don't want to allow him to pressure through and past my knees, but I also don't want him to go around my knees either. Not that he can really go around this knee because it's on the floor, but most of the time it'll be sort of over. And so what you're thinking about doing is trying to keep your knees ideally aligned, with your opponent. So ideally I want to have my knee aligned with his shoulder there. And so the big thing here is, as I try and pummel my left foot inside, I don't want to allow my knee to drift across. And you can see this here, my knee starts drifting in, and see how I immediately start retracting my knee there, and instead just sort of leaving it inside, because I don't want to point it too far across and then creating obvious flanks in this direction. And then when I mentioned as well before, Josh's leg trap, the leg trap is a great way to bring yourself outside of your partner's knees. And starting to create that angle on the guard and starting to create that access to the hips there. And so you can see this here, Josh trying to control my ankle to keep my ankle pinned, because then ideally what he wants to do is threaten my head. And you'll see me make mistakes here. For example, like see this here, like I start coming up on my elbow, and this is not a good move for me. And I'll talk about this a little bit later. It's because he's doing a really good job of like pinning my wrist. And you can see that there. I realize sort of what I'm doing, and I can see this. It's not a. I actually posted a recent video talking about like you shouldn't do this. And when I think about through the course of the match, like me doing that, I absolutely shouldn't have been doing that. Because it opens up all this space at my right hip here, and particularly combined with him pinning my ankle. It's not good. It also takes away the ability for me to use my right hand. Now, the reason I was doing it is because he's pinning my wrist, and I can punch across and strip that grip there, but it's quite difficult. And so instead, I was thinking about like more like heisting to see if I can retract my arm, because my arm's already occupied. I didn't think it was necessarily a big issue, but when I think about it later, like I think it was just something I shouldn't have done. One, it didn't really work anyway. Like it didn't really clear his grip. But also like it's then starting to make certain concessions that I don't need to. And so you can see this here, see how Josh is trying to circle outside. I think we're laughing a little bit because certain jokes are getting made by the crowd. And so now we end up in this north-south situation here. Now, the big thing I'm focusing from north-south is, one, trying to not allow my 2 feet to either extend away or extend like in either direction together. I want to keep my feet sort of in a high-low position. But the main thing I'm thinking about now is trying to bring one of my feet across the center line to bring him back in front of me. Like this here. So, and then see in this case here, I'm able to square back up. And so I don't want to allow my 2 feet to point in the same direction here. And this is where the self-framing comes back into play, where I can use the self-frame to assist with bringing my foot back in front of me here. And we move towards the edge. But I'll just sort of show the sequence a little bit here. So Josh does a good job. He starts trying to get outside of my legs. See how I'm not allowing my knee to point across his center line here. And I've got like my feet in misaligned directions to each other initially. But then now I end up having to invert as he starts circling around to keep him aligned with my 2 knees, but I need to still put him back in front of me. There's great opportunities here if he pressures in for me to potentially attack K-guards out of this, but also it's a good position for him to enter north-south, and not a very mobile position overall for me. And so again, trying to tie up his hands, because it allows me to see how to start trying to engage my legs, but then see how Josh is smart here. He clears the grips and he starts trying to grab at my ankles. And just on this here super quickly, I like to take mercy grips as a guard player. I know there's like Owen Jones likes to use it to steer people onto their back, and there's some validity to this, but it still allows me to keep my feet free to try and engage with the top player. And I like the mercy grips because it's not so easy for the top player to clear them, because see this here, see how even when he shucks me to my back, my left hand stays connected, and it takes a bit of work for him to clear that grip. And so as we get forced to north-south, so he does a good job here actually circling outside my legs, and we end up in this north-south passing situation here. Now, this is where it's important to understand framing when we start going back to like fundamental guard retention principles that I wanted to reference before. So Josh wants to end up getting himself inside of my hips here. So him trying to go to my shoulders, not so much. He wants to get inside of my hips. When you think about framing as a guard player, you want to frame towards the part of their body they're actually presenting the pass with. Oftentimes I'll see, say, for example, someone's pressuring in off of like a J-point camp, and the bottom player is framing towards the legs. Think about it right now. If I frame towards Josh's knee here, this really doesn't stop what he's doing up here at all. And so you need to keep your focus on the part of their body they're leading the pass with. And in majority of situations, and we're going to see an exception just here, majority of situations, people are leading the pass with the upper body, so you need to frame towards the upper body. So watch this here. I'm framing towards the upper body. I'm trying to bring my knees inside, for example, here. And one of the options I like is actually framing towards the elbows to try and, one, address the upper body, but also allows me to start clearing a grip. He tries to drop in with his hips here. And so there's actually a little technique I like to use where I actually like to use my head as a frame here against the stomach when people try and sort of drop their hips down in towards me. But see this here. See how he's not able to close that distance and get chest to chest on me because I'm framing on his elbows. And so it looks kind of silly, but this works quite well. You'll be surprised. And so what I'm thinking about doing is I want to be able to ultimately strip one of his grips and bring a foot across the center line. And then it allows me to either square back up with him. I can immediately enter K guards, things like this. So see this here. See how he starts pressuring down with his shoulders, for example. And so I'm framing against his shoulders. If I just sort of frame towards Josh's hips here, see how he'd be able to like actually close distance. But instead I'm framing towards the shoulders, making space for my knees to come inside. And now this is a bit of a mistake on my part. I kind of rushed this a little bit, mainly because I didn't want to hang out there for too long, with him trying to pressure him from north-south, because it can get quite tiring. And so I high leg here, but really I should have actually taken slightly longer to work towards a low leg. There is opportunities for me to attack a coil lock there, which I've done, in previous matches like 80cc trials, things like this. But really, against good guard passing, he's going to be able to do a good job of getting my 2 feet pointing in the same direction there, like this here, and see how he creates that angle outside of my knees here. See how I high leg, and notice I mentioned before about when I try to bring my foot across to potentially set up a false reap, I focus on not bringing my knee across. In this case here, my foot comes across and my knee comes across, and so see how now Josh has got this angle outside of my knees, and so he can start circling in this direction here, and it forces me to continue to have to try and react. And so I'm trying to widen my knee here and see how I invert my knee inside, trying to bring him back in front of me. And right now he's presenting the pass with this left side of his body, so I'm framing towards the left side of his body here. And so he does a good job. See how I invert my knee, so he tries to drag my leg on by. And notice this here, again, framing towards the shoulders. I managed to get him realigned between my knees, but I've still got my 2 feet pointing in the same direction currently, which is not ideal for me. And now I have him connected to me. So we just look at that sequence a little bit more. He's pressuring in towards a north-south here. I'm actually using my head and my hands as a frame here. It's probably the only real situation where I would ever actually use my head as a frame. Looks kind of silly, but it works quite well, surprisingly. And so I high leg here. Really, I should have made the space to actually low leg and bring my foot across the center line. Because of the fact that now he can actually go back into flanking and keeping the pressure on his pass. And so he gets outside of my knees here. He's creating this angle on my guard. So I invert that knee back inside and see how right hand here is starting to try and dominate the hips. He's trying to dominate my right hip here, which he potentially, like he's getting very close to doing. He goes to throw my leg on by there. And I'm able to frame, see how I'm framing towards the upper body here, keeping that focus towards where he's actually presenting the pass. And so then notice now once I reconnect, I'm trying to be more disciplined on my knee position here. And so from here, I mentioned before trying to like clear this grip. So I come up to my elbow for a second, like I said, shouldn't have done this because really all this does is opens up that space at my right hip. And so this is a mistake I probably make consistently through the match, because really see how he has that opportunity to get access to my hips there. He can go towards body locks and things like this. And it's such an annoying grip to deal with too. And the reason why I'm doing this is because like it's frustrating to have to constantly like clear a good grip that I've got to try and strip this. But really, it's what I should have done. And I think I need to come up with like more some different ways to actually try and address this. And so you can see this here. I take this inside hook because I think I was trying to recover a little bit from that initial north-south passing attempt. But really, I don't oftentimes anymore like playing with the knee shield if I can. Like a half guard position if I can avoid it. Nothing in the ankle locks there. I think he's just doing that to gain sort of judge's favor, which is smart. And so again, we're coming back to this sort of like tricep gripping here. And so again, same thing. What I'm thinking about trying to do is get my left foot on the inside or my right leg over his hip there. But Josh is doing a really good job here. See how like he never commits his knee too far forward either. And so one of the things that I like to use self-framing for is to actually try to elevate the person overhead. But because he doesn't actually commit his weight too far forward, and you can see this from his knee position here, it's not that easy for me to actually try and manipulate his weight. This is something, if you're trained with, say, like guys like Mikey Musumeci or Joseph Chen, they do a really good job of, is they never put their weight on you. They put it just off of you, which means that you're carrying their weight on like sort of the edge of on like the length of a lever, which is more tiring versus if their weight was like on you. And like they can tire you out by putting their weight on you, but when they're having their weight sort of just off of you and then you're carrying it like on the sort of the end of your frames, this is much more tiring. And so again, coming back to just that idea of like the hips. So see how like one of the downsides of Josh not bringing his knee far forward is it's harder for him to bring in at the pocket of my hip. But you see he does a good job here framing with his right arm. And if he can get his knee down in the pocket of my hip here, then he's in a really strong passing position. And so notice now I'm trying to recover the space there. I want to try and use my knee to collapse his arm, but I don't want to allow my knee to point too far across that then now he's outside of my knees again. And so see this here, see how I use the lasso. And I've been trying to come back to more some of sort of this sort of framing, like using the soles of my feet a little bit more. If you watch guys like Levi and guys like Mikey Musumeci, they do a lot more of that versus I use more guard retention style that I've gotten from training with like both Josh, Lucas Canard, Ariel Tabak, where you use more framing with your knees and elbows to bring your opponents onto you to open up opportunities for attack. versus I think Levi and Mikey do a good job of sort of playing a little bit more conservatively in terms of keeping people at like the full like ends of their frames there. And so you can see this here, and this is what I'm talking about by like bringing people like onto my knees a little bit more. And so one option, but it comes up a little bit later, and I'll talk about this, is like I could be pivoting onto my other hip, for example, and playing more of like an R guard type of position. And this is viable. And you'll see me a little bit later as well, sort of switch up strategies a little bit and think about more so maybe trying to play like more like knee shields and things like this because I'm just not getting the breakthroughs that I want. I'm doing a good job retaining my guard, but also not generating enough offense. And this is ultimately why I end up, yeah, so you can see this here. So starting to use like that, for example. And this is what I mean here. So if I sort of didn't do that, I wouldn't open this opportunity for a body lock. But funnily enough, this is actually where I get my best attack of the whole tournament, but then also make my biggest mistake. There's a bunch of technical things we can criticize, like say, for example, the elbow props, things like this. But in terms of like actual decision making, this is what I was sort of talking a little bit about before at the start, is about making bad decisions when you had good information versus when we can sort of retrospectively look at some of the decisions we made and now with new information say, okay, well, maybe I shouldn't have done that, or going forward I should do this. But and I'll talk about this now. So Josh connects on a body lock here. I use this as an opportunity now to get two strong overhooks. I generally don't like to play overhook sumigashi because I don't like the fact that I have to let the person get to a body lock to be able to basically start setting this up. But then I use this here to actually enter into my own sumigashi, and I'm quite strong with this. Sorry, that's the video sort of stream there. It gets a bit blurry. But what I'm doing here is I've got Josh loaded onto my right knee here, so I'm not so much lifting with my foot. You want to actually carry their weight on your knee. So if we think about where my leg is here, it's mainly about putting Josh's ribs against my knee here and carrying his weight on my knee, and then my foot can just do a little lift. A lot of people try and play sumigashi and they focus on doing all the lifting and having all the weight bearing on the ankle. But really, I actually want to have Josh's weight on my knee, and then my foot can just do a little lift, and that's what's going to take him over. And then with this here, I also work sort of like a like Sasai type of like ankle post here to assist with taking him over. So I've got Josh here doing a good job using my overhook here, getting his head low, and then exactly this, you can see it takes him over. So if we come back for a second, so Josh enters into his body lock here. I don't allow myself to get flattened out, if you notice this here. So I don't allow my back to get pinned to the floor. So I use this hook here because I want to try and maybe play like a knee lever, go to a half butterfly, things like this. And Josh uses that as an opportunity to get to his body lock. So because I do a good job here with my right knee, see how I retract my right knee and I don't accept a half butterfly. Half butterfly versus a body lock, passer is going to win every time versus if I can bring my knee back. And then something else I've been working on sort of in the lead up to this is even if he comes up to a high tripod, there's some methods I've been using to try and recover out of a high tripod as well. So if we ended up in that sort of territory, I wouldn't have minded too much because I could have played with some new techniques. But in this case here, he stays on his knees. And this is great for me because this makes it much easier for me to try and take him over now. So I start getting my off balance here and he has to come up to 2 feet now. If he doesn't, then he would just go over straight away. So I start loading him up on my knee here. See how he's doing a good job basing out with his leg. And so from here, my left foot just comes out. See how it blocks the front of his leg there? Because he needs to not just like post out here. He needs to actually post roughly here. And so his right hand, for example, he could post out with his right hand. My left arm's in a good position there to cover it. And so you notice my foot floats, but it already had done the work to just take away that post for a moment to get a strong enough off balance. And then I'm able to take him over. And now this is where I make the biggest mistake, which is I do a good job sweeping Josh. Keep in mind, it's not a points competition. But I sweep Josh here. And then I kind of just sit back. And I sit back without really gaining anything for it. I just kind of just sit back. And really what I should have done was use top position a little bit more, stayed here a little bit longer. Just done something with it, even just for a little bit, just sort of like spent more time trying to see, okay, well, how does his guard feel? Like, how's my passing feeling against his guard? Things like this. And if I was going to sit back, using it to gain something, and in the very first match I had in this tournament, I did exactly that. I managed to come up on top out of a leg entanglement situation, and then managed to sit back immediately into an outside archie, and could have looked to do something similar here. Josh is doing a good job. See how he's using the similar hook to what I just used there as well, where he's like hooking the shin here. And so I do have access to his hips here right now. but instead I stay quite conservative and I don't really do much with it. And then I basically just like sit back and then, and the reason why it's a mistake is um, just because in the end, it probably came down to the fact that I came back and just didn't really do much with top position because this ends up being quite a close decision. But my thought process in the moment was okay, well, my plan for this competition was to use the guard position to open up submission opportunities for myself. And guard is between guard and passing. Guard is actually the stronger position to create submission opportunities. It's quite difficult to create submission opportunities from passing. And so I swept, and the sweep was more incidental rather than something that I wanted to do. And so I kind of just sat back. But really, like, I should have still used it. And this is why I feel like this was a big mistake because even though my plan was to use the guard position to create opportunities for submission attempts, there's nothing retrospectively that really changes the fact that I should have stayed up on top. There's other things where you can look at it and go, okay, that was a bad technique, things like this, or like, oh, he was really good at countering that. Maybe I should consider for next time not playing this. And there's certain things I'm thinking about with adjustments to the way that I'm playing my sort of guard to create more submission opportunities for myself. But that's one decision I made where I go, okay, that was actually just straight up a bad decision. And so, because I sit back now and I don't really use it to gain anything. Now notice this here, I sit back and I allow my right knee to point across his center line. And so this is what I was talking about with like pivoting onto my outside hip. And I can use this to play like sort of like an R-guard position, but really I should have probably played it more like a De La Riva, potentially even switch towards more like a scoop De La Riva position here, something like this. And so you can see he's doing a good job putting pressure into me from this sort of like headquarters. And so I bring my right foot to the outside. And then so Josh is using this here to try and sit back on my legs. Really, I don't mind too much. So far this tournament, I think, I've done a good job of countering people's leg attacks. Even, the first match, for example, I started inverting my knee inside. And so he tries to sit back here. I'm using my De La Riva hook right now to make sure it's difficult for him to entangle this leg. And I can do things like inverting my right knee inside to then re-entangle his leg. So you notice I turn onto my side here. I'm starting to try and control his outside foot. But then Josh comes back up on top. And so I do a good job here setting up a De La Riva. But really, I should have tried to use this to maybe off-balance him a little bit more. Or like, even like pivot towards more like my outside hip, things like this. Even starting to like off-balance and force his hands, to the mat. This is like sort of like a small moment decision. But overall, I did feel like he was doing a good job putting more pressure on me from this position versus when I was on my other hip. It was just easier for me to get offense going from this side here. And so this would have been a good opportunity for me to try and enter into a false reap. But he's doing a good job at dressing my outside arm here while he's got this sort of knee inside. So I think this is quite interesting. And so I think we end up going back to more the inside hip for both of us because it's like safer in the sense that like less is happening maybe. And in Josh's case, I'd say so right now I'd say I'm ahead on the decision in terms of the fact that I successfully swept Josh. And I think a lot of people felt this way too. But you'll see Josh do a lot of really good stuff over the course of this match that really add up towards him taking the decision, which I think ultimately was fair. The fact that the decision went to Josh. As you can see here, I'm getting a little bit tired, so I'm playing with that inside hook again. Trying to address his outside hand so he can't pin my wrist so much anymore. Yeah, so and this is what I mean here, where before I was using the elbow prop because I didn't really want to have to commit my left hand towards trying to strip this grip because otherwise then it's, not allowing me to address other things that he's doing. And so then I'm having to start just reacting a lot to Josh. So again, same thing here. See how I'm trying to get my hands occupying his hands. And so this is what I was talking about with like a low leg to bring my foot across the center line. So like this here. So as we end up in a north-south situation, see how I'm framing towards his forearms like this here. And I'm bringing my foot across rather than high-legging over this side here. This is much better option for me because see how now it creates greater attacking opportunities for myself. Didn't quite have like the reach for the K-guard there, but ideally you get what I mean. And so you can see here then I'm using the fact that he's addressing my foot here to bring my left foot inside. Sorry, he's addressing my right foot here so I can make space to bring my left foot inside and trying to enter into a false reap. But I don't quite get my grips deep enough and it's forcing him to have to start overreacting there. And something I've been trying to do a little bit more lately is like combining false reap with like Tegatami and like going back and forth between the two. But I'll go back to this this retention sequence for a second because it's quite important. So trying to keep his hands occupied, trying to bring my legs into play here. He does a good job getting outside, forcing north-south. Notice, again, like I'm not framing towards his hips, not framing towards his knees, framing towards his elbows instead to make space, to bring that leg across the center line there so I can square back up with him. And so now if I go to the split squat here, you can see I'm starting to try and vary things a little bit. Like, I sort of bring my leg over, but I don't really want to try and use that to enter in the saddle because I can't do it with a false reap. And one of the reasons why the false reap is preferable is because of the way that you wedge the outside of your training partner's knees versus the more Carney Basami type entries where they can turn their knee out quite freely, and there's a ton of really good counters from the defensive player there. But you can see here I'm wanting to play my far K guard, but he's pinning my wrist here, and this is quite annoying. And then he's starting to sprawl this leg away. And so one of the things that he's doing that's making it difficult for me here to actually enter into K guard is the use of his right knee because it frames against my hips. But this is where I like to use my left knee here to actually force his knee down to the floor, just like this, because then now I can actually start bringing myself in. But then he does a good job just reinserting that knee there. And so I'm trying to alternate between attacking this arm to try and get different reactions from him. But he's doing just such a good job with the way he's basing himself here. And so now, yeah, so we see this here. So Josh actually starts entering into his over-under. And Josh is very good with the over-under. And, it's something that actually when we've trained together has come up a decent amount. We've talked about different ideas both on the over-under and also countering the over-under. And so there's a move I like to use here, and I briefly get this. And I probably could have potentially done more with this. And it's something I actually did at ADCC Trials in 2024 in the semi-finals. There's a really nice counter where you can use it to get to a crucifix position. So he starts driving in here, and so see how he's keeping his head inside of my hips. And so going back to this idea of guard retention principles, Pastor trying to dominate the hips and get access to the hips, Josh has got his head inside of one hip here, and he's got his elbow inside of my other hip. So he has what he needs now to actually start going into a strong guard passing sequence. So what I'm thinking about doing here is using my collar tie to bring his head away from my hip here. And then now I'm bringing my knee out and behind his arm to try and enter into a crucifix. There's a nice little way to sort of wedge my knee there. And I'll chuck on the screen here just now, just sort of a clip of how that plays out. But the point is trying to primarily displace his head out of my hip there, because then he's only controlling one of my hips. Another option Mikey Musumeki showed me is just simply framing the shoulder and bringing your knee inside of the shoulder if you've got the space to do it, but you kind of need to be a little bit early on it there. And then I come back to a more Z guard type of position here, which is, again, just indicative of me starting to get a bit tired. And so again, he's trying to attack the foot, and it's more, again, for Judge's favor. Josh is smart. He understands the rules. So you can see here I'm starting to try and use more cross-lat framing as well, especially when Josh is trying to gain access to my head. But notice as well, even when we end up in these knee shields, I'm trying to not allow Josh to get outside of his knee. I don't like playing sort of these Z-guard low knee shield positions. I prefer a high knee shield if I can, because otherwise then it allows him to be outside of my top knee. And even worse is if my knee points all the way across. This is what I mean. I don't want it to be there. And so you play it very borderline on the hip there, because you never want, you don't want to allow them to actually get over the top of your knee. And see this here, coming back towards that knee shield there. And you can see I'm controlling the elbow there, and I'm sort of jockeying, because at any stage I want to be able to sort of drag his arm in and attack my Teigatami. And so that's why I'm sort of fishing for that grip on the elbow there. And you can see this here, that wrist pin getting very annoying. And again, just him doing a good job here, getting inside of my hip, trying to bury himself in towards his J-point cam, and see how I'm doing a good job. I'm framing towards the shoulders here, not allowing him to bury his head, because one option for him is to go back to his over-under. He buries his head in here, and then his right arm goes from inside my hip to behind my leg. So I'm getting underneath his chin there, taking his head away from my hip, and trying to keep my right knee retracted here. And also trying to avoid him from actually pinning it with his knee. So I'll take it ahead a little bit, because at this stage here, there's a lot of repeats on sort of the same sequences. So you can see here, Josh try to pummel his foot inside and then start to walk towards the center line here. And this allows me to actually bring my foot out. And so I start trying to play a De La Riva position. And I'm trying to, and this is what I mentioned before about sort of trying to off balance him to the inside. And so this is what I'm looking for here, is my right foot hooking inside his knee to off balance Josh out in this direction. But he does a good job dropping to a knee, basing himself here. and then trying to point my knee across the center. And so see how I'm framing there, trying to widen that right knee, again, trying to avoid him from actually being outside of my knees here. And this is sort of, and in this moment here, and I sort of noticed a little bit earlier, is that Josh was never passing to my right, and that's because of his knee here. He's keeping all of his passing in this direction, and it's because, yeah, he mentioned later that he doesn't feel like he's got much stability on this. Like, just after sort of injuring his knee in the previous match, he didn't feel sort of comfortable trying to like rely on it for stability. And so notice same thing here, just similar for the north-south situation, is keeping my focus on the shoulders there, trying to make space with my hands to bring my knees inside, and then trying to bring him back into a more conventional position. So ending up in a similar ankle pin situation as before, and see how he's trying to use his head position here to bring my knee across the center. And this is not what I want. I want to, yeah, exactly this, like frame his head, bring him back in between my two knees here. And right now I'm leaning my head away, which is not ideal because it's opening up that space in my right hip. And really what I should be doing is bringing my head forward. And this is where like my left hand coming in towards like a cross lat is going to be a good idea. And I believe I start to do this a little bit more later. Because see this, yeah, exactly this here. He wants my knee pointing across. But that said, like, I don't know this at the time. I just sort of noticed that he's not really using his leg trap to circle in this direction. But even if my knee points across, he might not necessarily pressure over in this direction, but he might still think about coming over the top of my knee and using more of that sort of like Gordon Ryan style high head camping. And so this is actually a nice little sequence here and something I could have done differently. So let's look at how we got here. We can't really see because the referee gets in the way. I think Josh sits back on my leg and then comes back up on top here. Yeah, that's exactly what it is. And so I'm controlling here, potentially thinking about like trying to reach behind, seeing if, because I felt like with my knee shield, I'd have the space to then also pummel my foot across. And then from here, I'm able to actually go in towards my K guard. And I managed to actually get his weight off that leg, but really I should have come down towards Josh's heel with my right hand and use that to pull on him. Or my other option would have been to actually extend my leg out and bring myself back around to like a scoop de la Hiva. But instead, because I don't have Josh off balanced here and he's controlling my leg, it's a matter of time until he addresses my inside leg here. And so this is where it would have been good for me to actually extend my left leg past his leg there and go towards that scoop de la Hiva, because then I could have used that off balance him and then bring him back in towards a K guard. Because see this here, now he manages to address this leg. And so and going back to what we were talking about before with framing, so I'm holding onto his leg here. I abandon his leg because I need to address the upper body here. Again, holding onto his leg is going to do me no favors. So I bring my knee inside. My hands are coming inside towards his shoulders here, using this, and see how like I'm using my knee frames here. I end up being able to bring that. I high leg again and again. Like, this is not my preference, but I think it's just happening like sort of slightly in the heat of the moment there. And so I end up high legging across, creating that thread on the coil lock there that time. But I think that's more of a mistake on Josh's part to allow that to happen, rather than it being something where I'd look at that and say, okay, like this is what I should do every single time. And so now we end up in this sort of like, similar to before, this sort of like, not quite a headquarters, more like closer to a De La Hiva sort of situation, kind of, where Josh has got his right knee over my left hip. He's underneath my leg here, and he's going to switch towards like a double under sort of stack pass on me here. And so the main thing is I can't allow him to actually control the space of my hip. So he's got his hand inside there, but really he needs to elevate my hips, and ultimately he wants to end up either reaching across my center line or getting his chest to my lower back, like this here. And so what I'm thinking about doing is taking away his ability to control the space of my right hip here by bringing my right hand inside of his bicep and then using that as a frame to make space for my knee to slip inside of his elbow. We don't have a very good angle of it here, but this is something that Lucas Cannard likes to do a lot. And so you can see right now my right knee is inverted inside here, my left knee also inverted sort of inside of his shoulder. And so my knee, he wants to have it like my knee above his elbow. And so I frame and invert my knee inside. And this is actually something I got from Lucas Cannard, someone who Josh has trained with a ton as well over the years. We've both trained with like Lucas quite a lot. And I know I've gotten a ton of techniques from Lucas. And so we reached the end of the 10-minute period here, and then what they told us, and I think they actually, oh, this is something I didn't mention at the start actually. When they started the match, they looked at Josh and I, and they said, "Oh, so 10 minutes with a 5-minute overtime." And in the rules meeting, they said there would be no overtime. And Josh and I started asking questions to Mikhail, the referee, about like, are you guys going to stand us up? Like, what's the deal with the overtime? So we didn't know anything. Like we didn't know there was going to be an overtime till the start of this match. But because there's no points, I knew, okay, like the way that this works is, there's no, it's not like a 80cc overtime where you get penalized for pulling guard. It's just an extra 5 minutes. And so I could have potentially chosen to wrestle with him in the overtime here, but I just chose to pull. It's kind of what I had for the match there, planned for the match there. And so overall, this is a 15-minute match. And so we see here starting to end up in this, again, back in this De La Riva situation. Notice like my elbow on the outside of my knee reinforcing this here. So it's harder for him again to try and like pin my left hip. So again, just think about defending that space of my hips. And so from here, I'm trying to think about maybe diversifying my attacks a little bit, going more in towards like scoop De La Riva style of attacks. So I'm not thinking so much about the K guard. If I end up on a K guard, this is great. And so this is a similar movement here to what I was talking about before, the stack pass, where I'm inverting that left knee inside rather than sort of waiting for Josh to get underneath my hip there. And so I keep my left knee inverting inside here and making sure my two knees end up inside of his shoulders. And so my left foot is now pointing across, preventing that sort of making it difficult for him to actually flank me on this side. And so you can see him here trying to smother me. So I just match back with my own smother. But I'm not too worried here. And so actually, here's a better angle here. Same movement here. So bringing my hand inside of his elbow and using this to actually, start clearing my knee. And so that was the same thing before. Quite an effective technique. So if you ever think about it, so really what I should have done though is, or like what I wanted to have done, but I think because my left foot, I was kind of stuck turning towards my left. But I want to invert my knee and turn in this direction. So that way then as I invert my knee inside, that becomes my K-guard leg on that side there. Which is funny because for this competition, I wasn't really thinking too much about playing K-guard. I actually mainly wanted to keep it on Taigatamis and false reaps. Yeah, and so I think a bit of banter from the crowd there and Josh talking back. I think even at one stage, actually, I was shit talking the referee, but I can't remember when that actually occurred in the match. I think we were talking about the fact that at one stage, Michaela and I were like 1-1 in competition against each other, but that was, over it was over 9 years ago at that stage. Like I think that was the last time Michaela and I competed against each other. It was 2017. So you can see here looking for a similar thing. I was trying to invert my knee inside there, but this time Josh doing a really good job driving over and reaching across my shoulders here. And so again, same thing. Looking to try and frame on his elbow there to some degree, so I can bring my right knee inside there. Not as cleanly performed there, and I think also the mats are a little bit slippery at this stage, so Josh is like not able to quite get the traction he wants for his stack, and we're both quite tired. You can see here we're panting. We've been going for 12 minutes at this point. And so I feel like for the most part, everything that's noteworthy about this match that sort of occurred has happened. Not too much to show. I think at this stage here, I'm trying to come back up to more of a seated position to try and be a little bit more aggressive. So small thing here, if we just talk about seated, one of the big issues with when you play seated is people threatening your head and forcing guillotines. So if you can keep your head lined up with their center line there, then it's not a problem. What someone needs for front headlock is to be able to take your head underneath one of their armpits. So the focus would be is like as someone controls my head, is trying to make sure I'm constantly steering it towards their center there and keeping it like underneath them. And so I'm trying to get access to his hands here, trying to think about like tying up and wanting to try and potentially either wrestle up on him, play more of like an aggressive inside foot position, but then, sort of stuck there. So I just go, okay, I guess I'm just going to fall back. And admittedly, I'm quite tired at this stage. So I'm just sort of skipping ahead here because I feel like, oh, yeah, actually, you know what? This is noteworthy. Right at the end, Josh managed to get to a half guard position here. And so he gets a good body lock. I start using lower leg shift here, and then managing to get my left butterfly I believe I get my left butterfly hook. Oh no, actually no, I use a knee lever initially first. And then I start trying to come up onto an elbow because at that stage they're thinking more of like an overback sort of body locking situation, but still trying to work on this lower leg shift again because I've been using that a lot when people get to a body lock is actually using lower leg shift and slowly trying to slide my foot out towards the ankle there to create torque on the knee, and this allows me to start bringing my frames back inside. And so you can see this here, just a control there, trying to bring my left hand back in, able to clear his grip, and I just make my way back up to a seated and see how again I'm trying to play seated and see even here like Josh is trying to pressure in with his right knee, and so from here I bring my left foot inside, trying to extend his foot out to the mat there to keep him on two knees, and then see this here, I'm trying to jockey for that takegatami, and everything's from both of us here I feel like is done a bit sloppy at this stage because we've been going for quite a while. And then just yeah, tired. I think we're both trying to like sort of you know move a little bit, try and get something going, take a little break, try and move a bit, get something going, take a little break, just because it's been going for so long. And I think yeah, right at the end here, trying to be a little bit more aggressive on attacking the upper body because it's the final seconds. But it was a good match. I think it was tense, probably not like super spectator friendly, but with the money on the line there, and the bizarre atmosphere, I think it probably makes it somewhat interesting, but more so like a match that's better to look at from like a technical aspect than something that's meant to be super exciting. And so ultimately the decision ends up going to Josh. I think that was perfectly fair. I had the decisive sweep, but I feel like overall Josh did a lot more overall work across the course of the match that accumulated into that there. Into him taking the decision there. I think that was perfectly fair. And so I was pretty exhausted at this stage. So I think they raise his hand and I just go and lay down immediately. And I think Josh stays for a little bit to celebrate. So decision goes to Josh. We'll show him getting his hand raised there, make sure he gets his flowers. Yeah. I was feeling pretty confident. Like I felt like I was going to get it. I think we even spoke a little bit while we're standing out there and waiting for them to make the decision where Josh was like, oh, I think I've got that. I'm like, well, I got the sweep. And he's like, yeah, that's true. And so I, yeah, just raised my hand there and, just go and lay down and try and recover a little bit. And then I went home that night.